When my HOA sent me a bill for $300 to use a road I built with my own money on my own land, I didn't argue. I didn't complain. I simply smiled, pulled out the property deed, and watched as 63 homeowners suddenly realized they'd been driving across MY property for years. What happened next? Let's just say the HOA president's face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. My name is Marcus, and 5 years ago, I made what everyone called the worst real estate decision of my life. I purchased a 12-acre plot of land at the edge of a developing subdivision called Pinewood Estates. The property was shaped like an irregular polygon, with the narrowest portion running along what appeared to be the main access road into the neighborhood. While I bought the land, I had simple plans. I wanted to build a modest home, raise some chickens, maybe plant an orchard. Nothing fancy. The previous owner had been an elderly farmer named Walter Henderson who'd sold off portions of his family farm to developers over the decades. What remained was this awkward 12-acre parcel that nobody seemed to want. The reason nobody wanted it became apparent almost immediately. The land was landlocked by a steep ravine on one side and bordered the Pinewood Estates subdivision on the other 3 sides. Getting to my property required driving through the neighborhood, past manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses, until you reached the gravel path that led to my acreage. That gravel path was the beginning of all my troubles. You see, when the developers built Pinewood Estates 20 years earlier, they'd made a critical error. The main entrance road that connected the subdivision to the county highway ran directly through a strip of land that technically belonged to the Henderson farm. Walter had given the developers verbal permission to use this strip, and everyone assumed the paperwork had been handled properly. It hadn't. I discovered this accidentally during my first year on the property. I was digging through old county records trying to understand the exact boundaries of my land, when I found something remarkable. That entrance road? The one paved with smooth asphalt, lined with decorative lampposts, and maintained with HOA funds? It sat on a 60-foot wide easement that had never been legally transferred to the HOA or the county. It was still part of my property. I didn't do anything with this information initially. Why would I? The road didn't affect my daily life. Homeowners drove in and out, and I used the same road to access my land. We coexisted peacefully. Then the Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association decided to flex their authority. It started with a letter. The HOA had recently elected a new president, a retired corporate manager named Douglas Brennan. Douglas had decided that the neighborhood needed to professionalize its operations and maximize property values. His first initiative was conducting a thorough audit of everyone connected to the subdivision. Apparently, even though I wasn't technically part of the HOA, Douglas believed my property affected their community's aesthetics. He started sending me letters demanding that I mow my meadow more frequently, remove the unsightly chicken coop visible from the road, and paint my farmhouse a color that complemented the neighborhood palette. I ignored these letters because I wasn't bound by their covenants. Douglas escalated. In the summer of my 3rd year on the property, I decided to improve my own access road. The gravel path that led from the main entrance to my acreage was washing out every spring, creating muddy ruts that damaged my truck. I hired a local contractor and spent $42,000 of my own money to pave a proper road from the main entrance across my property line to my farmhouse. The road was beautiful, smooth asphalt, proper drainage, and wide enough for farm equipment. I was proud of my investment. 3 weeks after completion, I received a bill from the Pinewood Estates HOA. The invoice demanded $300 for unauthorized use of community infrastructure and connecting private improvements to HOA-maintained roadways. According to Douglas Brennan's letter, any road connected to their entrance must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee and was subject to connection fees. I read that letter 4 times. Let me explain something about my personality. I'm not a confrontational person by nature. I prefer to solve problems quietly and efficiently. But I have a deep appreciation for property rights and an even deeper irritation with bureaucratic overreach. Douglas Brennan had just crossed a line he didn't understand existed. I pulled out my property deed, the original survey maps, and the county records I'd saved from my research years earlier. I spread them across my kitchen table and studied them carefully. The evidence was clear. Not only was I not using their road, but they had been using MY Road for 2 decades without permission, compensation, or even acknowledgement. The entrance road they maintained, the one with their decorative lampposts and their Pinewood estates, an exclusive community sign, every inch of it sat on my property. I had options. I could have immediately blocked access and demanded compensation. I could have sued the HOA for decades of unauthorized use. But I chose a different approach. I wanted Douglas Brennan and his board to understand exactly what they'd done before I made my move. I paid the $300. Then I sent a letter of my own. It was a simple request for a meeting with the HOA board to discuss property boundaries and mutual access concerns. I included a copy of my deed, the survey map, and a politely worded question. Could you please provide documentation showing the HOA's legal right to maintain and control the entrance road? The meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks later. I spent those 3 weeks preparing my case with the precision of a chess player setting up checkmate. What Douglas Brennan didn't realize was that his $300 invoice had just cost his HOA something far more valuable: leverage. The HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a building that sat, you guessed it, on land that was also supposed to have been purchased from Walter Henderson but never properly transferred. I discovered that detail during my research, but I decided to save it for later. When I walked into that meeting room, 16 board members and curious homeowners were already seated around a long conference table. Douglas Brennan sat at the head, wearing a blazer and a self-satisfied expression. He gestured to a single chair positioned at the opposite end, like I was a defendant appearing before a tribunal. I sat down and placed a thick folder on the table in front of me. Douglas opened the meeting with a patronizing smile. "Marcus, we appreciate you joining us tonight. I understand you have some questions about the connection fee. Let me assure you, this is standard policy for any property that benefits from our infrastructure. Thank you for meeting with me," I replied calmly. "Before we discuss the fee, I'd like to clarify something. Did anyone respond to my letter requesting documentation of the HOA's legal right to control the entrance road?" The room shifted uncomfortably. Douglas's smile flickered. "Well, the road has been maintained by this association since the neighborhood was established," he said. "It's been our responsibility for over 20 years. I understand that's what you believe," I said, opening my folder. "But responsibility and ownership are different things, aren't they?" I pulled out the first document, a certified copy of my property deed. I slid it across the table toward the board members. "This is my deed, recorded with the county in 2019 when I purchased the Henderson property. If you look at the legal description, you'll notice it includes a 60-foot wide strip of land running from County Road 45 to the eastern boundary of my acreage." Murmurs rippled through the room. I pulled out the second document, the original 2003 subdivision plat for Pinewood Estates. "This is the approved plat for your development. Notice anything interesting about the entrance road? It's labeled private drive, easement required. The developers were supposed to purchase or secure a permanent easement from the Henderson family before construction." Douglas grabbed the document, his face reddening. "That easement was handled during development," he insisted. "Was it?" I pulled out document number 3, a comprehensive title search showing every recorded transaction involving the Henderson property. I've checked every recorded deed, easement, and transfer document for the past 50 years. There's no easement, no purchase agreement, no license, nothing granting Pinewood Estates the right to use that land." The room went silent. A woman named Patricia, who served as the HOA treasurer, leaned forward. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that the entrance road to Pinewood Estates, the road you've been maintaining, the road you installed lampposts on, the road where you placed your community sign, sits entirely on my private property. Every homeowner in this subdivision has been trespassing across my land multiple times per day for over 20 years. Douglas slammed his hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. You can't just claim ownership of a road that's been public use for decades." "Actually, I can," I said, "and I have the deed to prove it. But here's what's really interesting." I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo of the invoice. "You sent me a bill for $300 for connecting my private road to what you call your infrastructure. But your infrastructure is built on my land. By your own logic, you owe me connection fees, maintenance fees, and 23 years of retroactive usage fees. The math I'd calculated was staggering. Based on conservative estimates of 63 homes, each household crossing my property an average of 4 times daily, at even the most minimal per-crossing fee, the HOA owed me hundreds of thousands of dollars. Of course, I wasn't actually going to demand that money. That wasn't my goal. Douglas sputtered about lawyers and courts and adverse possession. His face had gone from red to purple. I raised my hand to stop him. Let me be clear about something. I'm not here to fight. I'm not here to block the road or demand compensation for past use. I understand that the original developers made a mistake, and holding current homeowners responsible for that mistake wouldn't be fair. The room relaxed slightly. However, I continued, I am here to establish something important. This road is my property. The HOA has no authority over it. You cannot charge me fees for using my own land, and you certainly cannot tell me how to maintain my own property. I slid another document across the table, a proposed easement agreement. I'm willing to grant Pinewood Estates a permanent easement for the entrance road. In exchange, I want 3 things. First, you refund my $300. Second, you agree to never send me another letter about my chickens, my meadow, or my house color. Third, you acknowledge in writing that my property is not subject to HOA governance. Douglas looked like he was about to have a stroke. And if we refuse, he managed. I shrugged. Then I install a gate at my property line, and we let the lawyers sort out whether decades of trespassing grants you any rights. I suspect that process will take years and cost your association significantly more than $300. The vote happened 30 minutes later. It was unanimous. I got my refund. I got my easement agreement. And I got the most valuable thing of all, a written declaration that Marcus Henderson, no relation to Walter, just a coincidental surname, was forever beyond the reach of the Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association. Walking out of that meeting, I heard Douglas mutter something about that smug farmer. But the other homeowners had different expressions. Some looked relieved. Others looked at me with something approaching respect. One woman stopped me in the parking lot. I wanted to paint my front door red for 6 years, she said. Douglas has blocked it every time. I don't suppose you could teach me how to fight back. I smiled and handed her my card. The months following that meeting were fascinating to watch. Word spread through Pinewood Estates like wildfire. Marcus, the weird farmer at the edge of the subdivision, had beaten Douglas Brennan at his own game. More importantly, he'd exposed something that many homeowners had long suspected. The HOA's power wasn't nearly as absolute as Douglas pretended. Douglas Brennan resigned as HOA president 6 weeks after our meeting. Officially, the reason was personal time constraints. Unofficially, the audit I'd triggered had revealed other problems. The HOA had been spending dues money on improvements to infrastructure they didn't actually own. Homeowners wanted answers. Douglas didn't have any. His replacement was a soft-spoken engineer named Janet Chun, who actually understood property law and believed in reasonable governance. Under her leadership, the Pinewood Estates HOA transformed into something almost functional. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the ripple effects of my little property war. First, there was the issue of the community sign. That beautiful Pinewood Estates, an exclusive community monument that greeted visitors at the entrance. It sat on my property. After the meeting, I could have demanded its removal. Instead, I negotiated. The HOA paid me a nominal fee, $1 annually, for a permanent license to keep the sign. It was more about the principle than the money. Second, there was the question of road maintenance. For 20 years, the HOA had been paying for asphalt repairs, snow removal, and lamp replacement on my 60-foot strip. That labor and expense had improved my property without my asking. Under the new easement agreement, the HOA retained responsibility for maintenance within the easement, but I gained approval rights over any changes. No more decorative additions without my consent. Third, and most satisfyingly, there was the matter of my $300. When Janet Chun took over, She personally delivered a check for $312. The extra $12 was interest, calculated from the date of my payment to the date of the refund. I framed that check and hung it in my kitchen. But the story doesn't end with my victory. It ends with what happened to the broader community. Over the next 2 years, I watched Pinewood Estates evolve. Janet Chin commissioned a proper title search of all community property. She discovered that several common areas had similar ownership problems, land the developers had promised to transfer but never actually conveyed. She spent months working with lawyers and the county to clean up these issues, creating proper easements and ownership records that should have existed from the beginning. More importantly, she reformed how the HOA operated. Gone were the petty enforcement letters about grass height and mailbox styles. Instead, the board focused on actual community issues, road safety, drainage problems, and neighborhood security. Homeowners who had avoided meetings for years started showing up. People actually volunteered for committees. Was all of this because of my property fight? Not entirely. But my confrontation with Douglas Brennan had exposed something important. HOAs only have power because homeowners believe they do. When someone actually challenges that power with documentation and knowledge, the illusion often crumbles. Let me share some lessons I learned from this experience. First, always research before you buy. When I purchased my property, I didn't know about the road issue. I got lucky that the discrepancy favored me rather than harmed me. But it could have gone the other way. What if the developers had actually secured their easement and MY access depended on their goodwill? Title searches and survey reviews aren't just paperwork. They're protection. Second, document everything. I kept every letter Douglas sent me, every invoice, every communication. When a meeting happened, I had a complete paper trail showing exactly how the HOA had overreached. That documentation made my case irrefutable. Third, know the difference between battles and wars. I could have been vindictive. I could have demanded decades of compensation, blocked the road, or made every homeowner's life miserable. But that would have created enemies and ongoing conflict. Instead, I chose a solution that gave me what I needed while allowing the community to save face. The result was lasting peace rather than continued warfare. Fourth, stay calm in confrontations. When Douglas turned purple and started shouting about lawyers, I remained composed. Anger makes you look unreasonable, even when you're right. Calmness makes you look confident, even when you're nervous. Douglas lost the room because he lost his temper. I kept it because I kept mine. Finally, understand that most disputes are about respect, not money. Douglas's $300 invoice wasn't really about the money. It was about power and control. He wanted to demonstrate that the HOA could govern everyone within their reach. My response wasn't really about $300 either. It was about establishing that I was beyond his reach. Once that boundary was clear, we could coexist peacefully. Today, my property looks much the same as it did 5 years ago. The farmhouse has a fresh coat of paint, the color I chose, not one from an approved palette. The chickens still roam their coop. The orchard I planted is starting to produce apples and pears. The entrance road is still there, still maintained by the HOA, still carrying 63 families in and out of their subdivision daily. But now, there's a small stone marker on my property line, installed with Janet Chin's blessing, that reads, Henderson Easement, EST 2022. It's a reminder. For me, it's a reminder that knowing your rights matters. For the homeowners who pass it every day, it's a reminder that the guy in the farmhouse isn't so weird after all. And for anyone who thinks about sending me an invoice, well, they know better now. So there you have it. The story of how a $300 invoice cost an HOA president his position and taught an entire neighborhood about property rights. If you've ever dealt with an overreaching HOA, or if you've got your own story of standing up for what's rightfully yours, I want to hear about it. Drop your experience in the comments below. And if you learned something from Marcus's story, whether it's about researching property deeds, staying calm under pressure, or knowing when to pick your battles, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We share stories like this every week, tales of ordinary people who refuse to back down when someone tried to take advantage of them. Like this video if you think Douglas Brennan got exactly what he deserved, and share it with anyone who might need a reminder that documentation beats intimidation every single time. Until next time, remember, know your rights, keep your records, and never pay a fee without asking who's really in charge. Thanks for watching.